On large plantations, they worked in gangs, supervised by a white overseer, or sometimes a slave overseer who would actually be more cruel. If you want to read more about that, check out the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. He talks about after he gets whipped one time how he decides he's not going to be a slave anymore. Larger plantations actually had slaves working as craftsmen. In some ways, they're like I talked about medieval Europe. In a lot of ways, slave plantations were sometimes like old Roman estates called latifundis. Usually, slaves were allowed to keep a small parcel of land. Um, and this is actually where soul food comes from because slaves were given kind of the not wanted parts of meat. How were slaves? How did they make? How were slaves made to do the work? Reason, persuasion, and sometimes more drastic discipline. Um, Often, especially in our area, slaves would be threatened with selling part of their family or themselves down the river, where they would be forever separated from their families. In fact, 1/3 of slave marriages, we think, and half of all slave families were separated through this practice. This is devastating to the families. The infant mortality rate for slaves children was twice that of whites. But the slave population increased significantly from 1790 to 1850. They will have inadequate food and shelter. They would, however, develop their own marriage and family rituals, including stepping over a broom after a wedding. I saw that for the first time in Grey's Anatomy. In the 1830s, major efforts were made. That's when major efforts were made to convert them to Christianity. We already talked about that. They also, as I mentioned, put their own spin on it. They actually put broken ceramics on graves. Though that's not unique in Christianity, the Norse did the same thing. Um, they would come up with different ways to resist. Some slaves would work slow enough where they do, just slow enough, just fast enough where they wouldn't get beaten. Some slaves would run away temporarily because they think that the beating would be less horrible than whatever they had to do. In one extreme case that I know of, one slave actually cut his own Achilles tendon because he didn't want to work anymore. Think about how horrible it has to be if you were willing to do that to yourself. If you've ever tweaked your Achilles tendon or torn it, you know how painful that is. In 1831, Nat Turner will lead the largest slave rebellion in American history during a solar eclipse in 1831. It lasted for 2 days. It had 60 to 80 slaves before the authorities stopped it. During this time, 55 whites were killed, and just as many African Americans. Nat Turner is important for us because it shows the sectional divide in this country. In the North, he was seen as a righteous warrior. In the South, he is seen as a butcher. This will, however, lead to more repressive slave laws. Now, in a lot of places, slaves could no longer preach. They were limited their access to firearms, which that always seems stupid to me. If you're going to enslave somebody, why would you let them get to a firearm? That's just stupid. The Romans did that with the gladiators, too. If you want to know how well that works sometimes, look up Spartacus. They strengthened the white militias.
Uncle, Pop-Up's calling.
Oh, wait. We'll call it back again. We're almost done. So it actually made any assault by a slave on a white person a capital offense. The Virginia legislature did actually debate whether or not to get rid of slavery. It was defeated 73 to 58, but that is pretty close, actually. But some states after this will even make it illegal to teach a slave to read and write. That is basically it. I do want to apologize again for not being in class. A lot of you have reached out to me, and I appreciate that. And it is a kind of a difficult time. But I appreciate the kind words that a lot of you have sent me, and I'll see you guys next week.